that was sort of my first project in pattern recognition, which is that part of artificial intelligence where we try to make computers recognize patterns, which is actually the heart of human intelligence. And I had a system that you could feed in melodies of a human composer, and it would recognize patterns and then create original melodies in the same style. So, and the melodies were recognizable as sort of as being a student of that composer. So the compositions would sound like a third-rate Mozart. Yeah, that won first prize in the International Science Fair, and the Westinghouse Science Talent Search was one of the winners. And I went on, I've Got a Secret. I went on, played a piece of music, and then whispered in Steve Allen's ear, I built my own computer. And he said, well, that's impressive. What's I have to do with the piece of music you just played? And I said, well, the computer composed the piece of music. And then Bess Meyerson, who was a former Miss America, was stumped, but then Henry Morgan, who was a film star, actually guessed it, which was pretty insightful. Computers were not that well known at that time. That was my first exposure, and sort of being able to communicate with a large audience, and gave me some of the excitement of inventing, being able to move people with projects that didn't directly help people in their lives, but that's the excitement of inventing as opposed to discovering science. Technology builds on science, but it really applies it to a way that moves people, and it is a form of magic. You take just a mundane set of materials or a mundane set of computer instructions, but in just the right combination, it does something that delights people, or maybe even helps them or changes their lives. And that's the exciting aspect of inventing for me. I have tried to pick technologies and applications that would have an impact on people's lives, whether it's creating music or helping overcome disabilities. That's what really excites me, is that, again, that linkage between dry formulas on a blackboard and the power of these ideas to transform people's lives. And it's something that, you know, I enjoy contributing to and working with my colleagues to accomplish that. The reading machine for the blind actually started out as a technology, a solution in search of a problem. We had this OmniFont optical character recognition that could recognize print in any type style. We didn't really know what it would be good for. And I happened to sit next to this blind guy in a plane, and he explained about the reading problem that blind people have, that very little is available in Braille and talking books, and he'd like to be able to access ordinary printed material. And so that then seemed like a very exciting, like, wow, we could actually apply this technology to that problem. And Stevie Wonder happened to see me on a TV show, I think the Today Show, demonstrating this when we announced it, and just literally dropped by and picked up our first production unit. And that was a quarter of a century ago. It was 1976. And so we've had a long-term friendship, and he's actually quite sophisticated about technology, and he's the one who articulated the problem in the world of music that led to my starting Kurzweil Music Systems. That on the one hand, there were these exciting control techniques, computerized methods where computer could remember what you played, and you could play multiple tracks and play a whole orchestra by yourself, but the sounds that you had to work with were very thin at that time, 1982. When you selected piano, it didn't sound like a piano, it sounded like an organ. When you selected violin, it sounded like an organ. Wouldn't it be great if we combined these very powerful control methods with the beautiful, rich, complex sounds of acoustic instruments? And I felt that, again, signal processing, pattern recognition, these fields could solve those problems. And Steve Wonder agreed to be our musical advisor, and we started Kurzweil Music, and in 1984 we had an instrument that when you selected piano really did sound like a piano, and we were able to fool concert pianists as to whether they were listening to a piano or a Kurzweil 250. So And I've continued to collaborate with Stevie Wonder over these several decades on different technologies, both in the disabilities field and the music field. Both areas that have, where technology has played a strong role. What I see is quite different than what a lot of people see, because I think a major failing of even some very thoughtful observers is the real implications of the acceleration of technological change. If you say that technical change is accelerating, people are quick to agree with that. It's just sort of motherhood and apple pie. But people don't really incorporate that. And I call this the intuitive linear view versus the historical exponential view. People assume that in the next 50 years we'll see 50 years of progress at today's rate of progress. And I've had these arguments. People will say, oh, well, we won't see nanotechnology self-replicators for 100 years. And I say, well, yes, 100 years at today's rate of progress, which will take 25 years. We're doubling the paradigm shift rate every 10 years. I mean, that's something I pulled out of the air. I've been studying this. I have models of it. That means the 21st century will not be 100 years of progress. It'll be 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of progress. And the 20th century was not 100 years, but was 25 years at today's rate of progress, because we weren't going at this rate of progress for the whole century. So the 21st century will be 1,000 times greater in terms of technological change than the 20th century. And the 20th century was pretty profound. And that's quite a different view than if you just think in linear terms, which most people do, despite the fact that they've lived through this acceleration. But they assume that it's going to stop, or they just don't think about it. And we're going to be profoundly redefining our own bodies, our own brains. We're going to be expanding our intelligence through intimate connection with intelligent machines. We're going to be spending a lot of time in virtual reality, which will incorporate all of our senses. And because it's complicated to explain all of that, but I do see the future will be very different, but it will be a extension of human civilization. It'll all be derivative of human intelligence, and will reflect human values. And it'll be an expansion, continued expansion really, because we've been growing exponentially. Our knowledge is growing exponentially, and we will continue that through the 21st century. And it's really the next step in evolution. Technological evolution actually continued biological evolution. You can see that very clearly. First paradigm shifts took billions of years, and it sped up and was taken over by technological evolution, and now paradigm shifts take just a few years' time. And the next step in evolution will be our enhancing our own intelligence through intimate connection with machine intelligence. We see very powerful trends, and we see that, for example, computer power has been growing exponentially, and people say, okay, but Moore's law is going to come to an end. But in fact, what I've seen is that every time one paradigm comes to an end, we replace it with another one. We've done that already 5 times in computation. So we can, I think, anticipate enormous power in all of these technologies. What they'll be applied for, we can't imagine all of the innovation that will occur. But I see it as fundamentally a spiritual process. I mean, the word God is really an ideal of, and has been described as infinite intelligence, creativity, beauty, love, all-knowing. And what we see in evolution is that intelligence, beauty, creativity grows at an exponential rate and gets greater and greater, never becomes infinite, but becomes enormously more powerful, growing exponentially, therefore becoming closer or more godlike, but never really reaching that ideal. So it's moving in that spiritual direction. So I see evolution as a spiritual process, and I see technology as the cutting edge of that process. And it is the human species, which is different from any other species, in that other species use tools, but they don't evolve over generations the way ours do. Taking the next step in evolution by merging with our technology and continuing to grow in this sort of exponentially accelerating condition. That particular writer, I think, is dealing with the issue of consciousness, which is a supremely subtle, slippery issue, ultimately the most important issue. I don't think it's a scientific issue, and in saying that, I don't mean to dismiss it. I really mean to say that there's room for, or importance to, fields of philosophy and religion that go beyond science, that really do deal with these issues of who is conscious, and deep respect for consciousness as sort of the ultimate reality. And Western thinking has been that there's all this swirling matter, and finally evolves to be complex enough, and you get entities that are conscious, whereas if one, at the risk of oversimplification, Eastern and Buddhist ways of thinking have very often started with the premise that consciousness is the ultimate reality, and that consciousness basically creates the world of energy and matter in our thoughts, and then we think things, and those thoughts then manifest themselves in what we consider to be physical reality. And I think in fields such as quantum mechanics, we're finding there's a blend of both, and that there's some interaction that's deeply mysterious between consciousness and the material world. I don't think there's anything as a consciousness detector. I mean, I think we will have machines that have the complexity, richness, and subtlety of human behavior. I mean, right now it's very easy to dismiss machines because they're still a million times simpler than human beings, so they don't have all the endearing qualities. If you have a virtual character that claims to be conscious and have feelings, we so quickly reach the limits of their performance, and they lack the subtle cues that we associate with really having consciousness and emotion, that it's not an effective impression. But we will achieve machines in a few decades that have the complexity and richness of human thinking. In many ways they'll be derivative of human thinking, or even copies of human thinking in a different medium, and they'll have the richness of behavior. And when they claim to be having feelings and being conscious, people will believe them. And if we don't believe them, they'll get mad at us. But there'll be philosophers who come along and say, yes, that entity is a really great simulation of a human, and it really is very convincing, but it doesn't squirt neurotransmitters, so it can't be conscious. And there's no way to really settle that argument. There's no machine you can put it in and a light will go on that, yes, this entity is conscious. It becomes fundamentally a deeply philosophical issue. But I think the reality will be that we will accept the consciousness of these entities, and there won't be a clear distinction. I mean, we're going to have human minds, brains, that have non-biological thinking processes melded with biological ones. We'll have fully non-biological thinking processes that seem very human-like because they're derived from human thinking, and there's going to be many different subtle ways of interacting, of the two worlds interacting, and there's not going to be a clear distinction between human and machine. If you describe today's world to people 100 years ago, they would find many things we talk about totally mystifying, even people from 10 years ago. But we don't wake up suddenly in the year 2040. We get there a day at a time, and it's actually interesting how quickly we adjust to new developments that seem remarkable. We kind of hear about them before they happen, and when they happen, they don't really happen because they don't quite work yet. Then they start working a little bit better. By the time they work well, it's not news anymore because we've been hearing about it for many years, and we kind of get used to these, gradually evolving changes. We have a great deal of plasticity as a species in what we can accept. So, we get there a step at a time, and each increment makes sense as it happens. So I think it'll be part of everyday reality. Well, I think once a machine achieves a human level of intelligence, it'll combine it with some natural advantages that machines have. Machines can share their knowledge. My knowledge of a subject is, a pattern of energy and matter, a pattern of interneuronal connections and neurotransmitter concentrations, and I can't take that pattern and download it to your brain. I can maybe take months to explain something, and you can explain things to me, but it's a very slow process. But machines can instantly share these patterns, and they're ultimately much faster. We use this chemical information processing that's 10 million times slower than electronic circuits, and we can't remember things very precisely. So a machine will be able to, once it actually achieves some of the subtlety of human intelligence based on our chaotic, massively parallel thinking processes, it'll be able to combine that with some of these natural advantages of machine intelligence. And machines will continue to evolve exponentially. The word never is also subject to the law of accelerating returns. It used to be when people said things will never happen, it actually took 40 or 50 years before they happened. And now when people say things will never happen, we see them in 5 or 10 years. So it's also an accelerating process. And Deep Blue used only one narrow technique in artificial intelligence, which is recursive search, just brute force of looking at all the different possible moves and then counter moves and building up this tree. And there's a few other tricks to it, but it was not using pattern recognition, which is a sort of chaotic, highly parallel, self-organizing process we have in the brain. But that's actually my field, and that's not exclusively a human province. We can create machines built on those same principles, and they'll have some of the same properties. They won't be perfect, but they'll be able to see insights and recognize patterns that are extremely subtle. And once we combine that kind of thinking with some of the logical analysis that computers have always been very good at, that'll be a very powerful combination. You know, Kasparov is commenting on this one machine that he encountered and then thinking that that's never going to change, and well, that machine may be able to play chess but really can't talk about chess and doesn't really understand the context of chess on a historical level, but that doesn't mean that no machine ever will. Well, I first grew up in kind of an urban area, Jackson Heights, and then we moved to a more suburban area. I went to a public high school, although actually it was a very good science program there. We had more Westinghouse winners than any other high school in the country, actually. I always had a project I was working on. Always had one good friend. I had some intense friendships. I wasn't gregarious, but I wasn't a classical nerd either. And I knew I wanted to be a scientist from age 5, but actually didn't understand what a scientist was. And what I really wanted to do was be an inventor. I mean, I liked creating things, some kind of magic. You put materials together and something happens that goes beyond what you put into it if you get the combination just right. For some reason, I decided I wanted to build a rocket ship, and it was amazing to me that you could put these ordinary materials together and then take a trip to another world. Didn't work, but so I learned that lesson. But I kept at it. Discovered the computer at age 12, and that did bring me to other worlds, but more subjective worlds. There was a fascination with science then that emerged. This was the 1950s. My parents found it surprising. They were both artists, but they encouraged it because science was the thing to do. So my father was a musician. He always felt actually I would combine computers and music because he felt there was a natural affinity, and he actually had an interest in the 1960s and some of the early synthesizer work. My mother was and still is a visual artist. But I had a lot of scientists in my family, actually. My grandmother was, I believe, the first woman in Europe to get a PhD in chemistry, and she lectured in Europe, and she also ran a school for girls. And so I came from an intellectual family. He sort of foreshadowed my combining computers and music. He had a fascination with some of the early synthesizers in the 1960s. He died in 1970. And he said that someday you will combine computers and music. And he saw an affinity both in the ability of computers to create sound and the ability of computers to control sound. He saw that there was a natural affinity there for those two worlds. He felt that music has always used the most advanced methods available. I mean, in the 19th century, the ultimate in the crafts, wood-making crafts and metal crafts were used to make instruments like the piano. The piano action is a very complex mechanical linkage, and it's the ultimate in 19th century technology. And so we've always used advanced technologies in all of the arts, particularly in music. And since music has a relationship to mathematics, it has a linkage to science and technology. I remember a math teacher, Mr. Ewan, actually a math teacher in 8th grade, Mrs. Matwell, who got excited about my ideas and wanted to listen to them. And my mother actually was kind of a fan of my ideas and would listen to them. Marvin Minsky actually communicated with in high school and came to visit him, came up to Boston. And to my delight, took me, a high school student, as seriously as he would take a professor. I mean, that is his approach. He sort of treats everybody the same. I think he really doesn't care if somebody's a professor or a high school student, or he's very excited with ideas and very honest with his reactions. But that encouragement was important to me. I've always been very relentless and managed to find a way to get the resources, the hardest one of which is my own time, to get ideas, to see ideas through. And that's an important aspect of success. It's just not to recognize failure. I mean, failure is just sort of success deferred. It just means it's going to just take you a little bit longer. But where an idea becomes so real to you that it absolutely is real, even though it may not be real to anybody else. And then it's just a matter of carrying out this plan that has emerged in your head. And you work backwards from this vision, from this fantasy that becomes very real, and then imagine, well, okay, how can we work backwards? If that were to exist, what would have had to have happened? And then it lays out a path that you kind of work out in reverse, and then you just follow it. And you have to be very, very persistent in doing that. But persistence towards a vision usually works. That's been my experience. At age 12, I discovered the computer, which was not as ubiquitous as it is today, but I had opportunity through my uncle to get access to a computer affiliated with New York University, and then discovered the ability of computers to kind of model reality. And that was very exciting. You could create the world in a computer. Admittedly crudely back then, but I think I sensed the potential to do that and really recreate any aspect of reality. And that has been a theme of my thinking, and I think we'll see that emerge in the 21st century, where we really can recreate our experiences and recreate the world through virtual reality, and that'll be the nature of the web in the 21st century. But that's kind of had a hint of that at age 12, and got involved in computer programming. Actually did some statistical programming that was distributed sort of as shareware. Built a computer back then that was able to do some calculations. Got really interested in pattern recognition, the power of that, because that's really the heart of human thinking, is our ability to recognize patterns in high school. I was probably influenced by the popular culture, which I think in the 50s began to discover science as important. And that built, then I guess in the 60s with the space race and all of that, there was a real public emphasis on science. And but it was never an abstract issue for me. It was really the ability to create new worlds. I actually had an interest in magic as a young child, also from the age of 5. I mean, traditional magic tricks. And sometimes would sort of invent my own little tricks based on some of the principles I learned from tricks I had bought. And I used to acquire lots of magic tricks and put on magic shows for my family. And so there was something delightful. The fact, again, you took ordinary materials, just mirrors and things, and if you did things in exact sequence, people would be intrigued with that. It would have an effect. But quickly realized that that was a superficial form of magic, because once the secrets were revealed, the magic would disappear. And the profound aspect of technology is that once the secrets are revealed, the magic doesn't disappear. In fact, it provides knowledge and power to create the next generation of technology, which will be even more powerful. So in a sense, the computer and technology were more meaningful forms of magic. But there's still that magic of getting materials in just the right sequence to create an effect that can be very profound and change our lives. And not just the technology I would create, but I became interested in technology in general. And I've been a student of technology trends, very interested in technology, even of the future, which gives me the opportunity to invent with materials that don't exist today. Because when Alan Kay says to anticipate the future, you need to invent it, but you need to have some sense of what will be available in the future to invent with. So it gives me the opportunity to actually invent things 20 years out through writing, which gets to be more abstract. You're not dealing with actual materials. I mean, my first inventions were physical and then moved on to software, which is more abstract, and then to really the world of ideas, which is more abstract yet. But ideas are very powerful. Those really the most powerful entity that we have. I mean, just take the concept of money. It's an abstraction. It's just an idea, yet everybody respects it, even if they don't respect the concept at some level. Everybody agrees to this elaborate system, but it's all an abstraction. It's all an idea. It's just one example of the power of ideas, and that's something unique in our species, that ideas have this kind of power over us, and there's things that we come up with, and the ideas evolve. That's something that we don't see in other species. That was my first business. We matched up high school students to colleges by computer. We built this database with several millions of pieces of information about the several thousand colleges, and students would fill out a 300 questionnaire, and we would match them up, not tell them where to go, but tell them, okay, here's 15 or 20 schools that you ought to narrow your search down to, that these are really appropriate for you to research further. Well, just having been through the process of applying to college, I saw it as a need. And so I could feel viscerally the need for that kind of information. And I saw among my fellow students how difficult the process that was. And today, there's much better information available with the web, and you can visit colleges on the web and there's just much better information. Back then, I mean, none of that existed, and it really was very difficult to find out about what schools matched your interests and were appropriate. And I just saw lots of students struggling with that and making the wrong decisions, and felt that a computer could really be a powerful tool for making that connection, providing a little bit of intelligence based on this information. And it really did work quite well. We sold it to Harcourt Brace and World, now Harcourt Brace Ivanovich, the New York publishing company. I think school was always just an environment. When I got to MIT, that was a more satisfying environment in that you had some really stimulating professors and students with whom I could share ideas, and a few of my best friends still stem from that early college period. And you had tremendous resources, and you had a flux of ideas, and you had other people who were excited with ideas and pursuing them, and it wasn't so unusual to do that. So it was a supportive environment. Courses specifically, they were interesting, but I mean, I felt I could learn as well on my own as I could in a course, and courses were useful to structure material. There weren't actually that many computer courses when I entered MIT. There were only 8 or 9 of them, so I took them my first year, year and a half, and then I majored in literature. They didn't have any more computer courses. Sometimes I felt different in that I always felt I had this mission from when I was young, and so when I saw other kids struggling, they didn't really know what they wanted to do, and I didn't look down at that, but I really felt that was different than I was, that I knew what my direction was. Well, some people are talented in many things, or their interests are more spread out, and they're not sure how to apply their skills, and I kind of knew what my mission was. My father was very talented, got a lot of recognition as a really brilliant musician, but was very busy, and they struggled financially. They were refugees having fled Hitler during World War II. I was on my own a lot, I think at a very young age. I remember even before 5, I remember building a go-kart when I was 3 or 4 years old. And, so I had to find ways of sort of occupying myself with ideas, but I'm not sure I fully understand the genesis of it. I just know that I've been that way. There's a sense of defiance in me, and if I have confidence in a set of ideas, to be resolute in that, to be very questioning of assumptions. I mean, I'm always questioning. It really take nothing for granted, and a lot of common wisdoms, even what people think are the wisdom beyond a common wisdom. I'm constantly questioning my own assumptions and looking for some deeper understanding or a more comprehensive framework. And a feeling that applying human thought can overcome any obstacle, and a real confidence in that. But it can take a lot of effort, but there's a confidence in the power of just applying your attention to any kind of problem, from an interpersonal issue to solving some of humankind's major challenges. Not just myself, but I believe that our species has that power. Talent is really just one prerequisite to success. There's a lot of other factors. Certainly luck has something to do with it, and a lot of factors beyond our own efforts in terms of having the right types of support and opportunities. And also picking the right problem. I mean, Einstein, after a few successes, picked a problem that we now know he was destined to fail at. So we, brilliantly pursuing a problem that you can't succeed in is to pick the right problems at the right time. But most importantly, I think, is persistence. And we see again and again, whether it's in the political sphere or science, people who are really relentless about their mission and can see the end result even more real than what we consider concrete reality, and follow that mission with great confidence, succeed. Very often people give up too quickly. They meet a few obstacles and think, oh, well, that didn't work. But that confidence doesn't come from just sort of mindlessly plowing ahead. It really comes from really being able to envision a reality that doesn't exist and seeing the benefit of it. And so imagination is important. If I sort of commit myself to a particular project or vision, I can't recall ever really dropping any of those commitments. I mean, it's kind of a profound commitment I make with myself to see something through. That doesn't mean that there won't be tactical shifts and certain specific little projects might get dropped, but I do ultimately try to see these projects through, and it's kind of a great adventure. You don't know what you're going to find. Probably the biggest thing I struggle with is just, the sort of triage of these ideas, because haven't really accelerated my own thinking process and those of my colleagues sufficiently yet that we can pursue all of the exciting ideas that come our way. So that's one interest I'm actually interested in. One reason I'm interested in writing about other people's work, because I can get then excited about the accomplishments of others and see other people who are pursuing exciting ideas and don't feel that I necessarily have to be involved in everything myself. I can share in them by being a student of technology. It doesn't really bother me. I mean, I've been thinking about these ideas for decades, really. They're not just idle thoughts I've pulled out of the air. I mean, there's a whole theory behind them, and sometimes people will look at one aspect. And I think very often the biggest issue that will cause someone to reject something I've said is that they're not really internalizing and realizing the implications of the acceleration of technical progress. They say, well, that's going to take hundreds of years, not realizing they're going to see hundreds of years of progress in decades because of this acceleration. They just don't really incorporate it into their thinking. So, and I'm not saying I have a perfect crystal ball, and there's been ideas that come along that have caused me to readjust my thinking, and criticism ultimately is more useful than praise. I mean, praise is nice, but it doesn't really it doesn't give you the ingredients to improve your thinking. Even if there's a criticism that I don't accept, I'll think about, okay, how does one deal with that criticism? How do you address it? And that may lead to some other useful ideas, or there may be some validity to a criticism that will also cause an improvement or some increment of my thinking about an issue. So criticism is really quite useful. And we do that actually in our projects as a methodology to not just sit around and praise ourselves, but what could be improved? What's wrong with this? Technology never emerges perfect. It's always a glass half full, so try to fill it more. Artificial intelligence has been called the field of computer science dealing with problems that haven't been solved yet. Every time we solve a problem, people go, oh, well, yeah, that was really easy to begin with, and now we understand it, it's lost its mystery, and well, computers still can't do X, Y, Z, and that'll always be the case until computers fully reach human intelligence. And by that time, this issue will be put to bed, but until that time, people are always going to be pointing out something it doesn't do. All right, so it does play chess. All right, so it can guide cruise missiles. All right, it does do medical diagnoses. All right, it can predict financial markets better than human analysts, but it still can't tell the difference between a dog and a cat. Oh, there's a new system that can do that. Well, all right, it can't deal with human language and give us a synopsis of a plot of a movie yet. When that happens, we'll find some other things computers can't do. But criticism is useful to really point the direction of how we can improve our thinking. Not really. But I hope that doesn't sound arrogant. That's just really a personal commitment to to a personal program and to a set of ideas. And I think if that kind of confidence were to lead someone to be arrogant, to doggedly pursue the wrong ideas, I think that would be unfortunate. So, I mean, I do try to listen to criticism, and not with the idea that criticism is, necessarily wrong, but feel that there is value in some goals that I've set, and to try to stay on that course, but to really keep an open mind. Any of the ideas that I have or that others have, and a lot of the common wisdom that we all share, it's very often found to be wrong. So I keep questioning everything. There's probably different ways. I mean, very often we don't understand the significance of something till generations after the person has departed us. But I measure it in terms of impact on people's lives, and we can certainly see that in technology. And I think technology is a double-edged sword. I think there are dangers, there's a whole issue there, but I think on balance we have really raised our species' ability. I really see it as part of evolution, the sort of evolution of our own cultural knowledge, and science and technology is part of the evolutionary process on this planet, and we have overcome great suffering. If you compare our lives to the lives of most humanity several hundred years ago, we live longer. Many more people can live fulfilling lives and pursue careers that give them gratification. That wasn't true of most of humanity centuries ago, and that's really science and technology that enables us to do that. So we can measure this in concrete ways, seeing the impact these things have on people's lives. But it's true also cultural expressions. Music moves us, as do all the arts, and gives us greater insight into the human condition. So at different levels of our existence, these different intellectual expressions, from art to science to technology, have a direct impact on human beings. Well, I think technology has always been a double-edged sword. I mean, its power to advance all of humankind's varied objectives, and certainly the destructiveness of human conflict has been amplified by human technology. We've seen that in the 20th century. I think on balance, the benefits outweigh the dangers and the actual destruction that the technology has made possible. And I think confidence is probably the wrong word. I'm hopeful that will be the case in the 21st century. The story of the 21st century hasn't been written yet, and we have much more powerful technologies that will emerge in the next century, and the opportunity to really overcome age-old problems, but also exacerbate our conflicts and destructive potential as well. And so I think the moral dimension and ethical issues are also very important in that regard, and it's something that concerns me as well. I think we have no choice but to proceed. I mean, there have been calls recently, and there have actually ever since the Luddite movement emerged in the English textile industry 2 centuries ago, calls for relinquishing technology that is just too dangerous. And I think we have no choice, because there's a great economic imperative to move forward, and it's a road paved with gold, and we have received tremendous benefit from technology, and short of creating a totalitarian system that would ban any form of economic incentive, we're going to be advancing technology. And I think the right way to deal with it is to be very concerned with the ethical dimension and with the application of technology. And I think it's not something that's done in one field of technology ethics. I think it's something that everybody, and not just the technologists, needs to be actively concerned with, because we have the power to actually create our future world, very literally, including the really redesigning our bodies and brains and our experiences in very profound levels, and so it's something that everybody needs to understand and contribute to that dialogue to make, so that we do advance our human values. Not that we have a consensus on what those are, but I think there is, at least at some levels, a emerging consensus on what human values are. To an individual, I would say to follow your passion, because the greatest value we have is ideas and knowledge. And new knowledge, which is really, I think, the purpose of evolution and the purpose of the human civilization, comes from passion. It's not a matter of learning dry formulas. Creating something new has to come from some passionate devotion to an idea. And so if you're passionate about music or graphic arts or writing or science and technology, that's what you should pursue. That's how you will contribute. And we can clearly see in the era of the internet that, for example, graphic arts have suddenly become enormously valuable. All of the different ways of expressing ourselves have tremendous value. There's tremendous thirst for content of all kinds on the internet, and that's going to deepen as that technology gets more sophisticated. So follow your passion, and if you become committed to an idea, then go with it. And secondly, question all assumptions. Not to the point of inaction. I mean, we have to make certain assumptions just to get up in the morning and go through the day, but reserve part of your thinking for questioning the common wisdom in every sphere, and even outside of your area of expertise. There's always a deeper wisdom if we can break through certain assumptions. Something I would say in general is to appreciate what a remarkable time lies ahead. One of the things that's actually growing exponentially is human lifespan, and I've got charts that show that, and we're actually adding today 120 days every year to human longevity. The 19th century was only a couple of weeks a year, and now we're adding a third of a year, and within 10 years it's actually going to be adding more than a year every year. And most of these, the vast majority of these young people here will see the 22nd century, and by that time we'll have even other things, so they'll see the 23rd century, and that century, this 21st century, will be 1,000 times more profound and see 1,000 times more change than the 20th century, and that was pretty significant. And they can contribute to that, and there's going to be no shortage of opportunity to be a player in the sort of next stage of evolution. The American dream is pushing beyond our boundaries and to new frontiers. And some of those new frontiers centuries ago were conquering new land masses, but now our frontiers are intellectual, and in the area of knowledge and in all of our cultural and scientific endeavors, there's a respect for taking risks. There's a tolerance and even a respect for failure, which some other cultures have some difficulty with, for experimenting and for learning and the trial and error that goes with that. A respect for the individual and that we're all different and all have a contribution to make, and respect for diversity and tolerance of differences. Even though we see a lot of prejudice and intolerance, our ideals reflect a tolerance for diversity, and I think we'll see greater diversity in the century ahead. So that's what the American ideal, the American dream means, and I think it's a perfect set of ideals and philosophies for this new era.